Tony Peterson here for Top 5 Rock Lists, and here I am again in a rainy, rainy Thursday afternoon, and once again we're in the middle of the COVID restraints. Everybody's got to stay away from each other. Um, so today I thought I would talk about the 80s. Today I'm going to do my top 5 favorite 80s bands. Um, back in now, whenever people play songs from the 80s today, it always seems like they're playing a lot of the synth pop, a lot of the stuff that 12 and 13-year-old girls used to play back in the day, back in the 80s. It's not the stuff that we used to listen to. And I don't know why the 80s got that rap of kind of having really terrible music. The 90s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, they all had those cheesy songs, but for some reason, when you are playing a mix of hits from, pardon me, from those other generations, you don't get a bunch of the cheesy music. So, I'm going to list off my top 5 favorite bands from the 80s, and I'm going to start with number 5, U2. U2 I listened to the U2 a lot in the 80s, not as much today as I did in the 80s, but they were definitely one of my favorite bands in the 80s. They had, they probably had From Boy and War, Rattle and Hum, those albums. There's they had a string of albums that I listened to a lot back in the 80s. I don't as much anymore, and I think it's because the subject matter that they were singing about was pretty topical for the time. A lot of social unrest type music, and some of that stuff has been resolved, and the anger and the angst that they were singing about is not topically front of mind anymore. That for me, at least, it might be for other people that see this. They may think I'm crazy. Some of the stuff, the Sunday Bloody Sunday, and songs about the problems between the Irish and the Catholics and the Protestants and etc. Don't necessarily resonate with me the way that they did back then. However, and also, I mean, Bono is such a pain in the ass sometimes. The guy, I just get tired of his political activism sometimes, as I do a lot of artists. I just want to hear your music and hear you sing about some of your favorite topics. I guess a good love song will last, will be topical forever, I think. And so, anyway, but boy, oh boy, did they make a big impact on my listening back in the 80s and even in the 90s. I guess I should probably talk about Slash's guitar work. I think that there are a few guitar players that nobody's really been able to replicate what they do in Slash, the Edge. The Edge's guitar work. There are a few guitar players that people just cannot replicate what they do, and he's one of them. Just incredible. So number 4, I'm going with the Smithereens. I feel like they've aged. Their music has aged very well. My favorite album back then is not my favorite album of theirs now. I like Green Thoughts a lot today from the Smithereens. That's probably my favorite Smithereens album, but they had 4 or 5 albums that I still listen to today quite a bit. And it's kind of a guitar driven, kind of a power pop type band, which I love. I love power pop music. The Beatles are my favorite band, and they're probably invented power pop almost, so pretty much, as a band. And Smithereens, a lot of melody, a lot of good jangly, crunchy guitar, and then that sometimes crunchy, but good, really timeless music. Number 3 on my list is The Police. Although their first 2 albums came out in the late 70s, I still consider them to be an 80s band. When those first 2 albums came out, people didn't buy a lot of their albums, and then we really didn't pick up on The Police as far as like buying their albums and listening to them a lot until the early 80s. And three-piece band, just a lot of great music. Stuart Copeland is one of my favorite drummers. Sting, you have to give it up for him and his voice. And Andy Summers also did some pretty unique things with his guitar. The band made me dance, which I like, and I think that's probably in large part due to Stuart Copeland's drumming, kind of a ska influence, ska reggae type influence. Good stuff. Number 2 on my list is The Replacements. Paul Westerberg, as a songwriter, is probably my top 10 favorite songwriters. They are a heavy, fast punk band that that almost has like a Bob Dylan type lyricist. Actually, I think that Paul Westerberg is a better lyricist than Bob Dylan. Really makes you think. He really makes you think. Just unexpected. He said a lot of unexpected things. I sometimes like to just Google Paul Westerberg's lyrics and maybe top 20 songs lyrically or something like that, and it's always very unique stuff that other people just don't think about. So that brings me to number 1 on my list, and if you've been watching some of my other videos, this probably isn't going to be a big surprise to you, but my favorite band from the 80s was REM. During the 80s, their first 5 albums were probably equal to or better than any band's 5-album span, from Murmur through to Document, Reckoning, Fables of the Reconstruction, Murmur, missing one in there. Anyway, those 5 albums, I think I would put up against any other band's 5 albums. Now, REM kind of jumped the shark, and as much as any other band I've ever seen where they were really great and they became a not very good band to me after they played when they came out with Losing My Religion. To me, that was when they jumped the shark. They kind of quit playing rock music. They quit being mysterious. They became kind of a whiny band, and I cannot listen to recent REM albums. But those first 5 albums just changed the way I listen to music. I know I've said that before in past videos, but that's those first 5 albums by REM made me think. the way the guitars and the vocals and the bass kind of wove in. They kind of wove in between. Hey, there you go. I knew that was going to happen. I dropped my phone. So they wove in between. You know, they wove into each other. One would be going down, and when the other one was going up, and all three of them did that. So let's get through this video. I'm up to 10 minutes here. I don't like to go too long. Some of my honorable mention bands. The Beastie Boys I listened to a lot in the 80s. B-52s, the Talking Heads, Squeeze, Clash. The Clash would have been probably, if London Calling had come out, it came out in '79. If it had come out in the 80s, I probably would have put them possibly in the top 5 because that album is so spectacular. In Excess, 10,000 Maniacs, the Rainmakers from Kansas City, and the English Beat. And I'm probably leaving some off, but you know, that's just a good idea of some of the bands that, if you're looking to explore bands from the 80s, those were. And as you can see, I'm not a big hair band fan. I like the alternative type bands back then, and I still do. And you know, I have come to appreciate some of the hair bands in recent years. Some of the music, my son listens to that, and you know, we've gone to concerts and things together, and I've come to appreciate some of that a lot better than I did back then. But for me, you know, those are the bands that people that you know, are looking for something that's going to resonate. I feel like music that makes you think and is going to sound good in 20 years from now, 30 years from now. 30 years from now, I won't be listening to these anymore. 20 years from now, we'll see. So anyway, don't listen to that crappy 80s synth stuff that is on Spotify and stuff. When you pop in an 80s mix, go and search out these bands that I just talked about, and especially, you know, go listen to a full album by some of those top 5 bands, and you'll be happy. This is Tony Peterson for Top 5 Rock Lists. Please subscribe and hit the like button, and I will see you next week.